Hello and welcome to Real Men Feel. This is your host, author, coach, and speaker, Andy Grant. Please visit theandygrant.com to learn more about me. Real Men Feel reminds men that they are human beings and have the right to experience and express all of their emotions. It's not that there are some emotions for men and some for women. You as a human being have the right to experience the full range. We have conversations that most men aren't having, but that all men can benefit from. According to the American Psychological Association, approximately 40 to 50% of first marriages end in divorce. The divorce rate for second marriages is even higher, with approximately 60 to 67% of second marriages ending in divorce as well. And according to a recent survey of financial professionals, the three leading causes of divorce are basic incompatibility, infidelity, and then money issues. My guest today is going to fix all that. My guest is Skye Michiels. Skye is a dad, award-winning real estate leader, motivational speaker, and host of the 6 a.m.ers podcast, which provides inspiration and motivation for developing a healthy mindset, setting goals, and achieving happiness. As a divorced dad of two, Skye is passionate about promoting positive co-parenting and determined to show divorced couples that a better, healthier, and happier experience is possible when a positive co-parenting relationship is established. Welcome to Real Men Feel, Skye.
Thank you so much for having me on. I feel flattered to be here.
When we first spoke, you introduced in a way that I had never heard before. You said that you were very happily divorced.
It's a term that I think it shocks people when I use it, because those two words typically are not used together. And I think it's a way to counteract a lot of the shame and the guilt and the the hurt. Depends on what your role was in the divorce, but you go through different things. But the word divorce carries so much baggage, so much negativity, and so much pain, frankly, for all parties. And when you put the word happily in front of it, it reframes that into divorce just being a noun, right? A divorce is just a thing, a noun, right? And the putting the word happily describes what that noun is, and we get to reframe that word in a way where I instantly try to convey, hey, I am in a happy situation right now, right? And by happy, I have a healthy children. I have a healthy ex-wife who I am friends with. I have a schedule that works for both of us. I have open lines of communication where if there's a change, we can communicate about it, and all those great things that frankly make up a good marriage also make up a good divorce. And that's the irony of the whole situation.
Yeah. So is it possible to have a bad marriage, but a good divorce?
It's very possible. I think, and once again, I'm sure my ex-wife is going to listen to this. So, I wouldn't quantify our marriage as bad per se, in the sense of we had challenges and lots of challenges like most married couples. But it is very possible to have a bad marriage and a good divorce, because sometimes the things that are wrong in a marriage can be solved in the divorce. And what you do is you come back. In order to be a happily divorced person, the first thing you have to do is you have to agree on your commonality. And for me and my ex-wife, our commonality, what were the things that were non-negotiables for both of us? It was our children, Mackenzie and Hudson. So when you start from a position of your non-negotiables, right, your commonality, all right, instead of us focusing on our differences, the things we don't agree on, right? I wake up early, she wakes up late. I like this kind of food, she likes that kind of food. I say it's sunny out, she says it's cloudy out. Yeah, we could go on and on. Instead of us focusing on all those, instead, let's start from our common standpoint. And then from there, we can work on the more challenging things that we need to figure out as we move forward in this new life. And it's funny, Andy, because I think you think of like someone getting engaged and then working towards a marriage. A divorce is almost the exact same process in reverse. You agree, you get to a point where maybe you don't agree, but you announce we are getting divorced. And then you work backwards on doing a lot of the things, as opposed to, you get engaged and you work forward, creating the household, creating the common areas, and then you get married. The divorce is almost the polar opposite, where you announce it. It's almost like your unproposal, so to speak, and you slowly work your way towards that pathway where you no longer are a married couple. But when you have children, especially, you still share a common love and a common goal, so to speak, of what you're striving for.
does being happily divorced now mean that the entire divorce process was smooth and joyous or not?
No. Yeah, no. Probably, once again, similar to like being engaged. Like, most people that get engaged, there's a lot of stress involved in getting married. There's a lot of stress involved in getting divorced as well. And our process was not roses and all happy, and the where we are today is not where we were when it first began. And when it first begins, and every situation is different. I call it divorce a fingerprint, right? Everyone's situation that's listening to this, it's going to be a different situation for each person. And my hope is what you can do is you can pull, almost picture an apple tree, and you can pull one little apple off that's going to help you a little bit. And that's really the goal. But our process was definitely rocky in the beginning, in the sense of I was the person that made the ultimate decision to leave. So I'm called the leaver, and she was the one being left, right? And so each of us played different roles in that. For me, I experienced a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, and you go through this process where you're struggling because of the fact you're the one that's making that decision, that you fear, a lot of fear, right? That, oh my God, I'm going to be the cause of demise of my family, and my children are going to hate me, or, your mind runs. For my ex-wife, it's a lot of anger, right? A lot of feeling of not good. And was I not good enough? Or, I don't want to speak for her, but at the end of the day, she had her own set of feelings that she experienced. So you're navigating these individual feelings that you're going through that rock you, right? And you're still trying to figure out, all right, how do we parent now? How do we divide households? How do we create 2 new households? Money, furniture, car, you name it, everything needs to be decided what happens. But through it all, what we did is we always kept the 2 kids as our commonality and our common point. And we always wanted to keep them above the fray of what was happening. So, and I'll tell you, if it's okay, I'll tell you a quick story about the day we told them that we were getting divorced. And we didn't use the word divorce, by the way. They were 6 and 4. And we had been through a very long process of therapy and trying, and and we were finally at the point where it was happening. It was moving forward. And I remember we were in a car in August. We were driving to get school supplies, and we're like, all right, we're going to tell them in the car. Now, we had been sleeping in separate bedrooms at this point. So we had a mom's room and a dad's room. And we're both in the front seat, like sort of crying quietly. They couldn't tell we were crying, and sunglasses on. And we were saying, so guys, we have something to tell you. Next month, how we have a mom's room and a dad's room? Well, we're going to have a mom's house and a dad's house. And they're like, cool, that's awesome. And we're in the front seat, like looking at each other, like, wait, shouldn't they be like really upset? And for some reason, like there was this moment of humor. It didn't really absolve all the sadness and the feelings we were going through, but it was a really funny moment to recall, because of the fact that we actually had created a world where they were comfortable, they were happy. And for them, it was, if we were fine with it, they were fine with it. Do you know what I mean? So we needed to like lead the way. And it was a funny moment to say the least.
Now, one of the common refrains I've always heard around divorce is, well, let's stay together for the kids. And you're saying really, well, let's make a good divorce for the kids. So is staying together for the kids, is that a realistic, is that a reality for anyone?
Well, it's a reality in the sense that people do it. But when you say you're staying together for the kids, you really have to question what we're always teaching children lessons. And whether we're speaking it or acting it, we're teaching, they were watching everything we do. And another story to give you, and it was one of the formative moments of why, or it pushed me, because I was saying the same thing. I was like, you know what? We'll stay together for the kids. Like, when they go to college, we'll figure it out, yada, yada. It's not that long a time. And I remember one morning, we're eating breakfast and kids were in the, at the kitchen bar, and we hugged each other, and they were like, ew, what are you guys doing? And in my head, I was like, oh my God, I'm teaching my children that intimacy is actually not, it doesn't exist. They didn't even know what it was like to see us like hug in that moment. Do you know what I mean? And I remember that moment probably the rest of my life. because it was one of those really formative moments where I was like, wow, I'm actually messing them up more by staying in this, because they see me distant, they see her distant, or they see us arguing, fighting. Like, so that's what a relationship is. A relationship is where you yell at each other. That's not a relationship. That's not healthy. That's not the way you deal with problems. And you get so wrapped up in your mind and everything along those lines, and you tell yourself you're staying together for the kids, but the reality is children know.
Yeah.
And the other reality is, the older they get, the more baggage they're dealing with, that then they could latch on that they were the reason, they were the, when they're younger, when you're at the point where this is the direction you're going to take, and then you say, well, 10 more years from now, it'll be fine. You are creating really, really negative pathways of learning for your children in those 10 years, where you could have there's another option out there to create a happy divorce with pathways that allow kids to thrive. We do all our holidays together. We do all our birthdays together. We do graduations together. And, I wanted my children to grow up in a world where they didn't need to fear their mom and dad being in the same room together, or the same event together, or, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's funny. My experience, it was what I consider traditional divorce of bitterness and hatred. And my parents did not get together. And at any sort of school assembly, dad's on one side, mom's on the other side, or mom's in the front row and dad's in the back of the room. And even talking about intimacy. So my parents divorced when I was about 5 years old. So I really have no memories of them being together. But I do remember being a kid and seeing my grandparents hug and kiss and, fooling around with each other in the kitchen. I was like aghast. Like, what are these old people doing? Like, when does this start in life? And this is crazy.
Yeah, but, exactly. It's so funny.
You mentioned as the leaver, as the initiator of divorce, you felt, shame and fear and concern about being hated by your kids.
Yeah.
How did you get through that? Like, what helped relieve the shame?
Yeah, therapy is the one. I mean, if you are going through divorce and you don't have a therapist, you're not doing the right thing for yourself. If you have the means to hire a therapist, or even whatever, there's a lot of insurance that covers therapy now. And if you are going through divorce on either side and you don't have someone helping you manage some of your thoughts and feelings, so therapy was the first thing. We also hired a co-parenting therapist as well, which was extremely helpful, because of the fact, once again, we didn't know how do we do this? What are the boundaries we create? How do we communicate? What's good, what's bad? So having a third party there to really help us work through some of these challenges, especially in the beginning days when it was very raw and very tenuous and very, there's still a lot of emotion. The other thing that got me through it was really becoming, and another smashing the two words together, is something I call healthy selfish, where I got really, really selfish around my personal health. Meaning, I was definitely when I was going through the initial process, I was in a bad place. And one of my dear friends, Jake Dreyfus, he started calling me and texting me at 5 a.m. And I started getting up at 5 a.m, going to the gym, working out, eating right, like doing all these healthy things. And we ultimately formed a group called the 5 a.m.ers, and a bunch of us would get up early in the morning and get on a Zoom call sometimes. And anyways, it was a really, really beautiful group. And that's really what helped me, is by realizing that happiness I can't get happiness from my ex-wife or my wife at the time. I can't get happiness from my children. I can't get happiness from my parents or coworkers. Happiness only comes from one place, and that's me. And it was I grew up, a people pleaser. As long as everyone else was happy, I was happy. And it took a very long time to resolve that mentality, that at the end of the day, my job is actually to make myself happy in a healthy way, right?
Yep.
That's why I say healthy selfish. We're not talking about doing bad things to people to be selfish. We're talking about doing the things that, hey, and if I'm up at 5 a.m. and my kids are still sleeping and I work out, that's healthy.
Right.
Yes, it's selfish as well. So it's one of those things that I developed a routine and a structure where my health became one of my number one priorities, because everything began, A, for me with my physical health, and then B, with my mental health, or vice versa. You could probably flip those back and forth, or whichever it might be. And then now that I've developed this concept I call being the light instead of giving the light. So my job is to be the light to myself, and that light will shine really bright and people will be, lit up from that, versus me trying to give the light and then depleting myself so much that all I'm doing is giving. And then all of a sudden I turn around and I'm spent. And there's going to be a point where I can't give anymore. Right. So it was a long process, but therapy, being healthy, selfish around your health and around the things that are going to make you healthy, both mentally and physically. And then really just making sure I was working on myself to be a better man, better person.
Yeah. I often say that selfishness gets a really bad rap.
It does.
The selfishness in the terms of competitiveness and taking things. Well, that's not good. But when you put yourself first, I find that's what you teach your children, that each of us matters, not that everybody else matters more than us. And again, when you're a healthy, well-rounded man and you put yourself first, you're naturally joyous life. You're naturally more full of light. You're of more service, and all of that positive energy spreads. So, I love the term. And when you're healthily selfish, you're positively impacting everybody around you.
Exactly. And here's the other thing as well, is that I also didn't focus on trying to get better in leaps and bounds. I tried to get better, and it's a very common term of like 1%, right? So I wouldn't measure like, oh my God, like we don't have this beautiful co-parenting situation 2 months after getting divorced. What I would measure is like, you know what? We passed off the kids without an argument. We got a little bit better today. We had a challenging discussion without yelling. We got a little bit better today. We successfully negotiated like a little bit of a change in the schedule without it being a big deal. We got a little bit better. And I think that's the other thing is like especially in today's society, we're being bombarded with social media and images of perfection and all this stuff that we create this like big gap in where we think we should be, versus taking a look behind us being like, wow, we've come a long way. Right. Do you know what I mean? And that was the other thing.
Only comparing ourselves to our past selves is the best comparison you can make.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So with things like positive co-parenting and conscious uncoupling, does that mean the bitter divorces are just a thing of the past, or do you still see them happening?
Unfortunately, I think they're going to be with us forever in many ways. I wish I could say we could wave a magic wand and any person that decided to get divorced would have the same positive messaging that we give marriage. We give a similar positive messaging to divorce, in the sense of, not to say we're advocating for it, but to say the sense that when you make that decision, we're going to approach it in this healthy way, right? Instead, and unfortunately we have divorce lawyers, and there are some great lawyers out there. This is not a criticism of the profession of the trade, but unfortunately a lawyer's job is usually to win for their client. And if you're working with a divorce lawyer who doesn't put your children first, I would recommend not working with that person. And then number two, we tried to create, was the win-win, meaning, okay, like I'm going to give up maybe some financially here, but I'm going to also gain here, or whatever it might be. And I think that's the other key thing, is recognizing that there are no winners or losers in divorce. There's only human beings in divorce. Cool. And I think we got to reframe the mindset of like, oh, I'm going to make that person pay, right? If you're the one that was hurt, I'm going to make him pay or her pay. If you were the one that was leaving, like, oh, I'm going to try to protect and hide and, do as much as I can to know, hey, you guys both people created where you were today. And what are you going to do to move forward and in a healthy way? The other thing as well is, like I said in the beginning, my kids were my number one priority. A healthy ex-wife, if she was healthy and happy, that's the best thing for my children. So if I'm, screwing her over with money or doing anything like that, what does that say about me as a father and a man? Right. So my goal was to say, if you are good, there's nothing better for my children than to have their mother in a beautiful space. And that was the other decision I think you need to make, is if your children are your number one priority, your partner needs to be taken care of in some way.
Right.
And it might not, money, maybe it's not financially, maybe it's emotionally, maybe it's with a schedule change, maybe it's whatever it might be. But if both people adopt the mindset that, hey, a healthy father or a healthy mother is the best thing for my kids.
From the moment you said I'm leaving to the time that you could say, wow, we are happily divorced. How long, what was that process? How long was that?
It was a long time, I would say. It was November of 2016 was the first time we were in a massive argument week before Thanksgiving. And it was the first, I'd been in therapy up until that point. And it was the first time that I was finally had the courage to say, listen, I'm done. At that point, we gave it one more shot with another, we got, after a long discussion, we're like, all right, let's give it one more shot. And we did hire another therapist, and we gave it a little more time. And I was done at that point. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't deny it anymore or fake it or, hope to change. It just wasn't going to change. And probably I would say it was, we always, even when we separated, we did the holidays together. And in the beginning, it was a little tenuous, going to her family's place or everyone was walking on eggshells a little bit. And here was the turning point. The turning point was when I started to own the divorce versus blame for the divorce, and in many ways, I could sit here on this call and say, oh, well, she did, and this is what I would do. Oh, we got divorced, but this is what happened, and this is what happened. And I was pushing the blame on her, and it's a concept I read in a book. I can't remember which book, but it's 100 to 0. It was the concept. I wish I could remember the book to give whoever wrote it the credit. But when I took 100% responsibility for my actions and there's zero responsibility on her side, right, was the moment that I started to be able to overcome it and actually own my role and say, you know what, yeah, there are things that happen, but you know what? I was the one that did, sort of withdrew into work. I was the one that didn't want to come home. I was the one that, slept in separate bedrooms out, and I owned my role. And then that was the moment I think that we started to start to ebb forward into that zone of happiness, I would say. In the beginning, it's not happiness you feel, it's relief a little bit, right? That there's progress. And slowly that relief will turn into happiness, or hopefully will turn into happiness. That's the goal.
So it sounds like there were problems. You both worked on trying to save the marriage, keep it going.
Yep.
What made you know this is the end?
It's a good question. There was no one definitive moment because of the fact there were definitely certain challenges and issues, out of privacy for my ex-wife. I don't want to go into it. Do you know what I mean? I'll just say there are challenges that we both experienced. We'll say that, right? And at the end of the day, we worked through a lot of those challenges, so there wasn't this one definitive moment for me where I was like, oh, I'm done. Because you'd have a challenge, you work through it, you're like, okay, maybe. And then you have a challenge and you're like, oh, I'm out. And then you're like, okay, we'll work through it. Maybe, so it was the death of 1,000 wounds more so, right? Where it was just cut. You had just enough cuts where you finally were like, okay, it's over. And there were little moments, of course, like my kids, seeing us be intimate and other things, but it was really just the slow buildup of little things over time to where I finally got to the point. And the biggest thing was having a therapist as well help me with my feelings of working through that, of guilt and how do I don't want to be in this situation anymore, but I don't know how to do it. And finally getting to the point where I was built up enough to have the courage to leave. Do you know what I mean? So
may seem obvious, but I want to ask this for the benefit of someone that's divorced, is in a situation and just thinks this is how it always is. So what are some signs that you're not in a great co-parenting divorce?
Signs you're not in a good co-parenting is when your children aren't comfortable with you being in the same space.
Okay.
right? If you know your kids get nervous or anxious, or when you two are in the same space, that's a number one sign. The second sign is when you're not flexible. Now there's a difference between having clear boundaries and then being flexible, right? So for example, I travel for work. I train around the country. So there are times where I'll call my ex-wife and be like, hey, can you, I was scheduled to watch them on a Tuesday. Can you switch a Tuesday for a Thursday? Now, her boundary is to say, no, I can't do that. And I'm okay with that. If she says, I can't do that, because we've already have an agreement laid out. But if she's just sitting home doing nothing and she has the ability to make the switch and it doesn't impact her in any way, that's a sign that when you are doing things just out of spite, that's not a healthy co-parenting situation. Now you can maintain your boundaries with zero guilt or zero. It's my responsibility to get coverage on my nights. Do you know what I mean? But I always want to use her as my first resource because I'd rather my kids are with her than a babysitter. Do you know what I mean? But she has the absolute right to say no. But if she's only saying no out of anger or spite, that's a sign that so if you're doing things out of anger and spite, you're probably not in a healthy co-parenting situation. And probably the third thing I would say is when you argue over inconsequential or meaningless things. You didn't drop the kids' soccer gear off. You're horrible. You're right. No, people forget. Yeah, I didn't drop the kids' soccer thing. Yeah, it's frustrating. I'm frustrated. All right, go, here are the keys to the house. Go, or I'm going to run home from work or whatever, right? But when little things become, big things are really inconsequential, that's probably your third sign that you need to do some work within your co-parenting, because your children see all of this, right? They see it all, So it's a situation where there's so many resources, not so many, there are resources out there. And I would highly recommend it that if you've never seen a co-parenting therapist, find a co-parenting therapist, have a third party. The reality is we're still dealing with our scars from the marriage, right? We're still bringing those forward. So it really is helpful when a third party can say, listen, here's what I would advise you do. Here's your schedule. Here's how you create boundaries, right? On whatever the advice is that you get, doesn't mean you need to listen to it exactly, right? But it just means there's someone that isn't carrying the scars that you guys both carry forward that can give you that advice. And that's so it's a great question of the signs of when you're not in a healthy co-parenting situation. What are those signs? And once again, just, me and my ex, we still have little things that come up. She'll get frustrated if I had to change a night, we're still human beings and we still have emotion, right? But we can recover from that very quickly or recognize when we're doing it and be like, oh, okay, my bad. Like that's really not a big deal. Let me just drop the soccer stuff off.
Right.
So
what I've heard so far for some tips to create this positive co-parenting relationship, start off by getting the commonalities, agreement on that. And you definitely recommend therapy, and ideally it's a co-parenting expert.
Correct. Right? Yeah.
And any other tips to make that process as smooth as it can be?
Yeah, I read the book Conscious Uncoupling, and that for me was very impactful. I would highly recommend people read that book if it's something that would resonate with you. And I think the other thing is like figure out what makes you happy, and make sure you're doing things that make you happy within the context of not harming anyone. You know what I mean? So if going to on a vacation to Florida makes you happy, and you're there for a month, that's not what I'm talking about.
Not escapism, but
exactly. Thank you. It's the perfect terminology. But doing the things like making sure, my body's healthy. I'm, hanging out with my friends. I have relationships with my family. The things that really fuel your life and your happiness. Definitely, it's really critical when you go through this process, not to hide or not to withdraw, but to really embrace those things that do create the happiness. And when you're in there, never try your hardest to not talk ill will of your partner, and reframe, it's one of those funny things, like language is so powerful. Like I try not to even use the word ex-wife. Do you know what I mean? Because that X, right? There's almost like a negativity to that.
Yeah.
So often like I'll call her my partner, and that's really the more appropriate terminology. She's my partner in my kids,
Right.
And that's it.
All right. So if I asked your partner if you were a great ex-husband, what would she say?
95% of the time, I think she would say, "Oh, he's the best." I think the 5%, my schedule is a little hectic. I can definitely. I'm a person that I can do a lot. Like I'm also not a planner, so I can like be like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to the beach with the kids this weekend." She's like, "Oh, what? Wait." Not that it impacts her, but she's once again, these are our differences. So those are the little things that she would probably say I could get better on is a little more organization, a little more planning, and a little more structure. But 95, my argument would be that she would call me a great ex-husband in the sense of, 95% of what she would want me to be, I am.
Yeah.
It's that 5%
That's a strong
me.
A. That's
Yeah, I think
top of
I'm
the
an A.
class as
Yeah,
an
yeah.
ex-husband,
Yeah. Yeah.
ex-husbandry
Let's
class.
not call her on the phone. No, I'm kidding. Just kidding.
And
Hey,
I always
what's
wonder.
the grade?
I always wonder every time I have to talk to someone that's been divorced, especially recently divorced, does this turn you off against ever being married again?
Um, it's a good question. On a personal level, and this is just for me personally, like I don't have any desire to get married again in the sense of, being in a relationship does not mean marriage. And I think there are certain there's certain societal things that feel heavy with marriage to me, and probably this is my scars bringing forward. So I think there's a difference between being in a relationship and being married. So for me personally, at this stage of my life, I have no desire to be married again. Yes, desire to be in a relationship again for sure, but not to be married again. In my mind, I don't need a ring or a piece of paper to determine what my feelings or actions are going to be, if that makes sense. So,
and we've touched on sheer making up words, shame and fear. I've combined them into sheer. Still there's sheer. Besides that, what do you see, and based on your experience and what you see in others, what are the biggest challenges? What are some of the biggest challenges for divorced men?
Biggest challenge for divorced men is you typically there's a world where there's not a lot of support there's not a lot of support, period. But for men especially, there's usually very little support. There's usually very, few groups. It depends on your social group. Sometimes there might not be other men that are divorced that or if you do, they might not be the best person to talk to, right, about it. Maybe they're not healthily divorced or happily divorced. So I think the challenge for most men is that you sort of suffer in silence. I was very lucky in the sense that I had some really, really dear friends that were also divorced in a healthy way, but also gave me really good advice along the way and were there when I needed them to, hey, I just need to grab a beer with you and talk about what I'm feeling. Right. So being able to find a couple people that are very healthy for you and your outlets is key. And it allows you to form that healthy thing. But the biggest challenge is most men suffer in silence.
In your teaching and your coaching world, you talk a lot about leading with kindness.
Yeah.
I'm going to can you explain that a bit?
Yeah. So one of my mottos I have is that, my mission in life is to show that love and kindness is a source of power and strength. Meaning in our world, traditionally, like we see, if you use the word power and strength, you typically would view big, muscular male, Navy SEAL wrestler, something really big and dominant. But the reality is who's actually moved the world? It's the people that have used love and kindness to create massive levels of power and strength. Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi, he defeated the British Empire. Right. And when you think about it, and how did he do it? He did it through love and kindness, and Martin Luther King changed, civil rights in this country. So you look back in history and the people that use power and strength in the brute sense will always have fallen out of power, have always, been defeated, have always been sort of put down or put out. And it's the people that have used loving kindness have created lasting change. And that's, I think, one of the things that I come back to, that in all of our settings, marriage, career, business, the world, politics, if we can get to this point where we recognize that loving kindness, like when I'm loving and kinding towards other people, that actually is a source of strength and creates power, versus when I'm trying to bulldog someone or, push them under or defeat them or whatever it might be, using brute power and strength. That might work short term, but eventually it's going to either come back on me or it's going to just consume me, one of the two. So when you use love and kindness, you can run for infinite, for infinity into the change that you can create and the power and strength you can generate, because of the fact that love and kindness, if it goes back into that be the light concept, love and kindness is when you can be the light, right? And emanate that. And that light, instead of just shining in one direction, goes everywhere. Yeah. So it's sort of a philosophy I like to live by, and a philosophy that I like to sort of push out there for business leaders and politicians or anyone that listens to me. It's something that I sort of preach. So,
and again, that healthy selfishness helps you tap into that limitless light that we do have the ability to tap into. So,
right.
Cool. And I want to give you, tell me about your podcast. Tell me about the 6 a.m.
Yeah. So I work, my role, my career right now, I'm the head of agent development for a real estate company called Compass, which is the #1 national brokerage. We have about 30,000 people all across the country. My job is basically, my day job, we'll call it, is to design training curriculum and deliver that to real estate agents across the country, virtually and in person. In the pandemic, when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, we're all knocked down at home, and I was just like frustrated by it and eating unhealthy, drinking, binge watching TV, etc. So I got a little frustrated, and I basically just resurrected, some of the practices we used in the 5 Amers, and I launched the 6 Amers just in my local office. We had about 50 agents sign up. We're all home. We had no reason to wake up at 6 a.m., but we were all started just waking up early and then getting on a Zoom call and chatting and talking, right? And creating a community. And then every month since then, the organization the community, I should say, just started to spread all across, the country. So I would be doing these Zoom calls, and it's one of those funny things. I look back and I'm like, wait a minute. After a couple of years, I'm like, I have hours and hours of beautiful interviews with some powerful people. I want to make sure that this gets out there into the world. So we basically went, my co-host, Emily Bosser, and I, we went and we recorded the intros and exits for 24 of the episodes. We're going to be going out in about a month or so to California to record season 2. And what we do is basically just take our morning interviews. Not all of them. We curate the ones that we feel are the most powerful. And then we record the intros and exits, and then we're releasing those in the podcast. And it's been an awesome situation to be able to bring authors and business people and, leaders in all kinds of areas to, the group obviously meets at 6 a.m. and not everyone is a 6 a.m. person. So it's nice to be able to bring it to people outside of the group as well. So it's called the number 6 a.m. ERS. It's on my shirt.
Excellent. So Skye, what's the best way for people to learn more or connect with you?
Yeah, so Instagram is right now my platform of choice. So to follow me on Instagram, it would be the @symbol, my first name SKYE, my last name MICHIELS, just @Skye Michiels. The 6 Amers, I would love for you to also follow that, and that is @THE, the number 6 AMERS on Instagram, and those are the two best channels that I communicate with and sort of operate on.
Cool. Awesome. I really enjoyed talking with you and sharing your experience. This is kind of my favorite show, is when a man shares his experience and how he's shining the light and serving the world now. So
that's
so
great.
Good for you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're doing as well. It's great to bring, the ability to talk about this stuff and, not suffer in silence. To anyone that's listening to this, it's huge. Don't be silent,
Great. Thanks everyone listening. Thanks for tuning us in. Wherever you're listening to Real Men Feel, please give a like, a share, a comment, whatever you can do, wherever you're finding us. And did you know that there is a private Real Men Feel Facebook group? Well, it's true. And you can join by visiting realmenfeel.org/group. You can also reach out and connect with me via email anytime you choose, realmenfeel@gmail.com. And until next time, be good to yourself.